Oh, that's okay. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Father. And good morning, Fathers. I just have 3 simple points in my presentation from the Department of Religious Education. And the first one has to do with RCIA. The second has to do with adult confirmation. And then the third has to do with other. So RCIA, adult confirmation, and other formation opportunities. So let's go to RCIA, and I'll devote about 5 or so minutes to that, and then move on to the next topic. When I started classroom teaching about 20 years ago, I asked the students in class, "What does RCIA stand for?" And one smart aleck kid raised his hand and said, "Roman Catholicism is awesome." And of course, Roman Catholicism is awesome, but that's not what RCIA stands for. So RCIA is the process where it's built on what the early church did with the catechumenate and processing or inviting and welcoming new Catholics into the church. And so one point to start off with here is that in RCIA, the emphasis that we're placing here is on non-Catholics entering at the Easter Vigil. So non-Catholics entering at the Easter Vigil. And there's a distinction between the catechumens and the candidates. So the catechumens are those that haven't been baptized. They need the 3 sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. And then the candidates for full communion were validly baptized, but they are receiving confirmation and Eucharist for the first time. I would like to just focus on the non-Catholics at the moment. So the emphasis here will be on what do we do with those that are coming into the Catholic Church for the first time. During the RCIA formation process, one important area for pastors and us catechists to look at is a review of the marital status. It's important to look at the marital status of those inquiring into RCIA at the beginning of the process. So the inquiry stage, we want to look at, were they married before? Have they been married a couple of times? And this process should be reviewed. And we're actually updating a diocesan intake form that we will send out once it's been finalized. So I'm working with Father Fergal to include a process where not only does the parish sign off on it, but we also are looking at having the judicial vicar sign off on making sure that the marital statuses are in good standing with the church. And again, it is highly recommended, or it should be done at the beginning of the process. And I've communicated this briefly with my fellow RCIA coordinators in the diocese, but as priests and pastors, it would be good for you to be aware of this process. If there are any questions about the need for declaration of nullities, then those can be directed to Father Fergal's office. And again, I would recommend having that sent over directly to them. I don't train our catechists to address the annulment question specifically. I only inform them that the marital status is an important part of the RCIA process. Typically, the pastors will also, typically the RCIA coordinators don't delve into civil marriages or needs for convalidation. We don't delve into if there is a cohabitation situation. We will provide the catechesis on that throughout the year, but in terms of approaching the catechumen or the candidate, typically that's something that if that's something that the priests can look at and address. I can make a concerted effort down the road with our catechists and their training, but in terms of reviewing the marital statuses, the intake form will be a good way to address that. Another point is for right of election, right of election is, it does not include liturgy of the Eucharist. It's a process where the bishop formally welcomes or calls these individuals that are journeying into the Catholic Church. The right of election is reserved only for non-Catholics. So, here's the good news in the trend in the diocese. The past 3 or 4 years, we have averaged about 100 new Catholics coming into the church, and that trend has been steady. So, but right of election is that process where they, and you fathers are certainly invited to participate in this. We have an event at the cathedral, and we have a second right of election event up north in St. Mary's. In terms of the records administration, this is just a friendly reminder to enter the baptisms into the register. For the confirmations, also enter the sacrament being administered at the parish into the register, but also if you could remind the parish secretaries to send the church of baptism notification that confirmation has been administered. So that kind of gives you a little overview from start to finish on just some critical areas for intaking new Catholics into the church. And thank you, fathers, for all the support that you've given to the RCIA coordinators.
You just confused me there. So those
Okay.
adults who are confirmed at St. Eugene's for the adult confirmation, I'm supposed to register that at my parish?
No, if they were confirmed at the cathedral, then they should, the records will be at the cathedral. The cathedral will be the church of record.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a clarification from the bishop. I know that the bishop wanted to separate the confirmation for those who are not receiving baptism. During the Easter Vigil, those who are being received in the church, can they be confirmed during the Easter Vigil?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The question was that there were Catholics who were coming back to the practice of the faith who were not confirmed, and they were normally added to the RCIA program, which is fine in terms of a catechetical program, but they cannot be treated in the same way as a non-Catholic coming through the same system. A non-Catholic makes a profession of faith in the Catholic Church, and that can be done at the Easter Vigil, and at that occasion they are likewise confirmed, and a notation is made in the baptismal register that this person made their profession of faith on such and such a date, and they were confirmed. Catholics, however, the priests do not have an automatic faculty to confirm Catholics, who are already Catholic before they entered the RCIA. That requires a special faculty, and it is not proper that we turn the rite or the Easter Vigil into a rite of confirmation. That's not the proper place. It is focused on baptism and conversion, and we had so many Catholics being confirmed at the Easter Vigil that it really took on the nature of a parochial confirmation class. And that just is not the proper place or the proper time. I readily grant a faculty to the priest to confirm adult Catholics in their parishes who have not been confirmed. However, I generally restrict that to either Pentecost or at very least is not granted for the Easter Vigil, unless you have, a non-Catholic man who is being received into the church and his Catholic wife has never been confirmed. Faculty say, can I confirm the wife in the same ceremony? Absolutely, provided they are married in the church. Now, the reason why I'm asking Dennis to do a more thorough job of sort of vetting those who are coming into the church through the RCIA is that every year I look at the baptismal registers, as you know, and many of you know that I've asked you questions about what about this person who was received into the church? Are they married? Oh no, Father, they're civilly married, but they're planning on marriage next month. I think, but you baptized them. Well, yeah, because they were ready. I think, well, but they're living in an invalid marriage, and you baptized them and gave them communion. How are they to understand that they're living in an irregular situation? And so there seems to be a tremendous amount of misinformation and misunderstanding, and I want, at least as a training period, to have all of those intake forms, both for Catholics, coming back to the church, and for non-baptized and baptized Christians, to create a form that would go to Father Fergal so that he could look at the marriage questions and help form the catechists, the directors of RCIA, and even you, to anticipate questions that should be asked. Because I'm finding an abundance of confusion on the part of RCIA directors, and they're not necessarily the ones who have information about marriage. They're not canonists. They're not expected to know this. They say, oh yeah, Father, they were married, but it's okay. They were not Catholic, so it's not a binding marriage. And unfortunately, many priests seem to have a confusion about those things as well. So I want, for a time being, for those things to go through Father Fergal's office, so that we can educate and train and anticipate the questions, so that we don't have people coming 3 weeks before the rite of election, or even at the Easter Vigil, and find out, oh, but they're married outside the church and their previous spouse was married before. Well, what do we do? Well, you know what? Those are the questions that need to be asked day one, not after they have completed the RCIA process. So that's the goal of the intake form. Yeah, Stephen, do you have a question? Someone? Yeah, Sean?
Can we have a training on that day? Because I had a little confusion as far as, especially with undocumented people, them being baptized and irregular. So when Fergal has this, when we get the form, can we have some kind of Q&A?
I'm sure that Father Fergal would be quite thrilled to anticipate that and to provide something for you. A thorough course on marriage and canon. Marriage and canon law and marriage. It's standard seminary courses that unfortunately a lot of people didn't pay much attention to. But they are important issues because they do have to do with the status of persons. And they're not necessarily complex, but they're also not necessarily easy. And again, there's a lot of misinformation, and I try to correct those piecemeal as I visit the parishes and look at the baptismal register. And when I ask, well, did you have any converts through the Easter Vigil? And they said, oh yeah, we had 3 or 4. I said, well, why aren't they in the book? Oh, we put them in the confirmation book. Yeah, I think, well, no, they belong in the baptismal book. And where is the marriage? Is this person married? And they'll say, well, yeah. I said, why isn't that information here in the baptismal book, in the notations? And even if there's a prior marriage, it's a valid marriage in the church, then it needs to be noted in the baptismal book. And those are standard operating procedures, and so I want to make sure that I do my part to instruct and inform and form those in the RCIA program to anticipate that and to recognize that the record needs to be complete. Confirmation, previous marriage, all of those things need to be included in that particular form. So a lot of work that needs to be done there, and this is sort of the start of it. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Dennis.
Maybe to direct this to Father Fergal. How realistic is it if at the start of the RCIA process and you 2 or 3 of them have to go through a formal church annulment? How realistic and fair is it on the tribunal office? Say between this, we're starting in September, they're expecting to be baptized or received into the church at Easter Vigil. Is it?
No, most likely those annulment cases will not be completed prior to the Easter Vigil, but it's a whole lot more fair to his office to know that in September than to be asked the question in February. And say, well, no, they've gone through the program, they're anticipating their families coming, and what can't we baptize them? So to anticipate those questions is the goal.
Best to say to that individual or couple, you will be baptized or received whenever or as soon as the annulment is done, and not necessarily by Easter time.
But from my own experience in parish, I think the place where we get into, I've gotten into trouble is when we develop this expectation as kind of a school year program, and that you're going to go through it. The first thing is, even though the Easter Vigil is the ideal time to baptize, receive in the church, first communion, confirmation, it's not restricted to that. I have had situations where people, you can do it pretty much any time during the celebration of the Mass. It's probably not appropriate to do it during the Lent, but that's a church-built thing. So that's the first thing, and I think if you explain to people at the very beginning, that's why Dennis and I have been talking about, and I think it's also appropriate that the priest sit down, because my experience is, oftentimes, particularly in the bigger parishes, we don't have much contact with the RCIA group as individuals. And maybe it's not a bad idea for the priest to sit down with them anyway and have this as part of a conversation. The one advantage is right now, and Abel been bearing me out on this, is since the changes that were made in Vicus Judaex Dominus Iesus in 2015, the process is shorter, because we no longer have to send every affirmative decision to Oakland for review, which was sometimes created a significant delay. But there are all sorts of other things that can happen to slow down the process. So we'll have some cases that are done in 6 months, some cases will take 18 months to 2 years, but that's oftentimes something that's outside our control. And so, each case is individual, but certainly you can start with the beginning and do it. That can answer the question? It does.
In effect, Dennis, the sooner an annulment process is begun, the sooner it will be completed. So to anticipate, but they can certainly be in the RCIA program and come to the point of saying, okay, you are among even the elect. However, at such point as an annulment comes through and your present marriage is validated, then the pastor can receive you into the church. And as Father Fergal said, you can do that any day of the year without exception. Right? And have a right of election individually for that individual, validate the marriage, receive them into the church, confirm them, make the notations in the baptismal book about their reception into the church, their confirmation, their marriage, and that can be done. So they can participate with the class in terms of the formation, but maybe not complete the process at the Easter Vigil as they hope for. But certainly the formation in the RCIA is suitable for everyone. Yeah, Abel.
Yeah, just simply from my experience, I think it's very important to explain to the people from the very beginning that there's any questions to contact the tribunal, because when I was there, the judicial vicar, people came up with the expectation, Father explained to me that this was going to be a done and easy, annulment, and there's so many factors, as we were explained, that are beyond our control, but people have already had that expectation that they're going to be confirmed, maybe the first communion or whatever sacraments at the Easter Vigil. So I think we just have to be very careful with that, and if there's any questions, I would recommend it to address them to Father Fergal, but from the very beginning, to avoid that frustration with some of the people that may have those high expectations.
And it's both, have you ever been married in any kind of a marriage ceremony of any type, regardless of your perception about what that marriage meant or how long it lasted, or he's a Catholic and he was before a justice of the peace, therefore it doesn't count? Wait a minute. We need to backtrack and make sure that we understand the nature of that particular marriage. And if you have two people who are simply cohabiting, you have to make sure that the marriage is validated before they are baptized or before they are received into the church, and you cannot simply say, they're going to get married at some point in the future. That we have to do these things in the proper way and in the proper order. And again, getting that information earlier rather than later, in my view, is absolutely essential in order to accompany them appropriately during the course of the RCIA, so that you don't create, as Father Abel mentioned, unrealistic expectations and promises that, we're planning on being baptized. And it's like, because I've encountered any number of people, even at the rite of election, visiting with them and said, my former spouse, this and that. And I'm thinking, but does the pastor know about your former spouse? And so I run into those things frequently enough that we as a body, as a presbyterate, need to be much more attentive to that and acknowledge that there's lots of folks entering into marriages for lots of reasons. And Sean, certainly the issue of the undocumented is a particularly challenging issue, and no one has an answer to that. And yet I do know that the position of the church is that we cannot go off the reservation and say, okay, we're going to do an ecclesial marriage, that is not civilly recognized, because that just creates, potential harm to them and to the church in major kinds of ways. So until we establish a system like Mexico, where the two ceremonies are entirely separated, we have to maintain our civil connection with marriage, even though it's society looks at marriage a lot differently than we do at the present moment. So challenges ahead of us. So anything else, Dennis?
Yes,
Yep.
Bishop. If
He's
I
got
may.
more points. Thank you. So one other thing before we finish. I've found myself in trouble in a number of different places where I think when I ask about marriage with a couple, I'm thinking the same way they are, or they're thinking the same way I am, because I literally had a case in St. Eugene's where somebody had said, well, it wasn't real marriage, and I found out a few months before, it was in January that I found out talking to this person. So, the way the bishop was talking about it, sounds like it's very, in any kind of a ceremony whatsoever, because also sometimes we get locked into this idea that, well, it didn't happen in the church, so it wasn't valid. Well, you have to remember that's ecclesiastical law and only applies to Catholics, the requirement for canonical form. So two non-Catholics get married, if they're both free to marry, then that's a valid marriage in the eyes of the church, which is one of the indulgent, so condemned. That's sometimes one of the most difficult things to try and explain to people why we're getting involved in that. But it's because we recognize the validity of that marriage, even if they don't and civil society doesn't. We do.
Okay.
So even on that note, thank you, Father. Oh, yes.
Just a clarification. I think I talked to you about, or heard you say about the registration of the confirmation is at our parish. But if they're baptized someplace else, do they have to go there for the baptism and St. Eugene's for the confirmation records?
No, if they're baptized somewhere else, what we need is the certificate of baptism. That's part of the paperwork process that we in our office submit to the cathedral. And not only that, if they are married, they should be married in the church. We also need a copy of their, the certificate of marriage. So those two documents will go in. I don't know if that. So does that answer your question,
The
Mike?
confirmation, the notification for the place of baptism. I think Cathedral took care of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that there is a notification that is sent by the parish where the confirmation takes place to the parish of baptism and saying, please make this notation on this person's baptism.
So they could go to either place and get both registrations?
No, there's not a new baptismal certificate created at the cathedral. They have one baptismal certificate in their place of baptism. That record is repeatedly updated for confirmation, for marriage, for vows, for annulment. That parish is noted as a single source for that certificate.
Okay, so they have to go to both places. Confirmation here, baptism.
No.
No.
They will never need a certificate of confirmation, but if they get a baptismal certificate, it will have a notation there that says confirmed.
All right.
That's a part of the notation on the baptismal certificate.
Okay.
Something that needs to be discussed even in parishes within our diocese. When couples are getting married and they go to a parish for the baptism certificate for marriage, not a lot of parishes are putting the notations on the back. And maybe we can talk to our secretaries to remind them. When our parish staff is making baptism certificates for marriage, we make sure that they're putting in the marginal notes and notations, because a lot of parishes that are, when I'm looking at baptism certificates, the confirmation information, first communion information isn't on the certificate, and they were confirmed at that parish. And so then they have to go and get another certificate for marriage, but all they have to do is just write it on the back.
Yeah, unfortunately, as we know, parishes have not necessarily been good or diligent about, number one, notifying the place of baptism in when confirmation takes place, and secondly, not making the notations in the baptismal book when confirmation notations are received. So it is particularly problematic, but what I'm used to is that anytime you receive a baptismal certificate, either there are notations on the back of this is recorded in our baptismal book, or the simple statement, no notations. Then it's clear that, we don't have a record of the confirmation. The person says, well, I was confirmed at the cathedral in 2017. Then that person needs to go to the cathedral to get a confirmation certificate in order to in effect document their confirmation. Although confirmation is not necessary for salvation, and so if you could take their word for it and say I was confirmed at the cathedral, then you could put on the baptismal or on the marriage register, the marriage prenuptial form, confirmed at cathedral 2017, date unknown. And because they will remember their confirmation.
I think that's just something I wanted to emphasize is please. In the United States, one of the requirements is for marriage to get a recently issued certificate of baptism with notations. The way the canon law sets it up is dioceses, the countries, episcopal conferences make rules for this. Complementary norm for the United States is a recently issued baptismal certificate. Unfortunately, we've been getting some cases, particularly those going overseas, that are not giving us new confirmation certificates or baptismal certificates. And so I'm having to call the Church of Baptism to get that, which delays the process of getting it to Italy or France or wherever it is going to, because more than likely some notary or something in some diocese in Italy or Spain or someplace else is going to send that back because A, it's not the original document, and B, it's not recently issued. So it should be done automatically, but particularly if you're sending it out of the country or out of the diocese, make sure that there's a baptismal certificate that is no longer than 6 months old when you got it, with the notations, or, as Raul mentioned, just simply write no notations across the back of it. The same is true when you're sending an electric warrant case. So that's really important. In fact, what the Bishop was talking about, it's been I'm sure the balance on prostitute, but it seems like we've got a few of those recently going out of the country. And so I've been following up on that so it didn't get sent back from whatever that is to get sent to.
I have some talking points on a one-page paper if you're interested in getting that later. But a couple more things. Oh, yes, Father Dennis.
Just had two other questions going back to the bishop about notifying the church of baptism for the person who is being received into full communion. If they're baptized in the Episcopal or the Lutheran.
No, you don't notify those churches, only Catholic churches when you have a Catholic who's confirmed.
Second question is, there is a couple in the RCIA process, neither of them is Catholic, and they are cohabiting. Do we go ahead and, since they're not yet Catholic, they're not baptized, how do you handle the
either you do
marriage situation before the
you could do a couple of things, and those are specific examples. You could have a private ceremony with them in which